So this week we're going to talk about some cultural strategies of organizing, and you'll read a lot about organizational culture here. What I want to do in this week's video is to provide a culture framework, one of the most kind of respected culture frameworks that really exists, has existed for about the past 30 years or so, and to give you kind of again, a different framework, a way of thinking about culture and organizing. So you'll often hear organizational culture described as the way things are done around here. You'll think about it in terms of, you'll hear it thought about it in terms of an iceberg. There are things that you see kind of on the surface that are visible, and then there's a whole lot of stuff that's underneath the surface that we don't always see. So you'll walk to a new organization, for example, and a place you have never been before, and you'll see people dressed a certain way. You'll see the office laid out a certain way, maybe a certain kind of art hanging on the wall. You'll start to see how decisions are made, or different people talk. You'll start to see different kinds of patterns. Underneath that, things that you can't see, some underlying philosophies, underlying values. You don't always see those things, but there's a translation up and down in this hierarchy from things that you see that are visible to things that you don't always see that are underneath the surface, kind of like that iceberg. So we're going to do a little activity here, and I want you to grab a piece of paper or make notes here, and I'll give you a chance, and I'll give you a few seconds to think about this. Just to do a quick diagnosis as a way of explaining what we mean by versions of organizational culture. So I'm going to put up a page here that will have a series of statements. There's 30 sentences on this page, and I want you to choose 3 that represent your organization today. If you want to think about your own team or department, you can do that too, but 3 sentences that you think represent your organization today, and 3 sentences that you think represent your organization, how it should be in the future. Then I'm going to change the color of those statements, so I want you to write down the colors of each of those statements. So you might need to hit the pause button on the video while you read these statements, but I'll give you some time to read all 30 of these statements and then write down the 3 that relate to your organization today and that you think describe you today, and the 3 that you think describe you in the future. So I'll give you some time to do that now. If you haven't yet chosen your 3 statements of the past or present and 3 statements of the future, go ahead and hit the pause button on the video and think about that for a minute. And when you're done, hit play. Okay, so now I've changed the colors here, and next to those statements that you just wrote down, I want you to write down the color of the statement next to what you described about your organization in the past and in the future. So we'll give you a second to do that, and then I'll tell you what these colors mean. Go ahead and hit the pause button if you need to, and come back to me when you've got those colors written down as well. Okay, so what do those colors mean? I'll introduce this by describing this framework called the Competing Values Framework. The Competing Values Framework was developed by Kim Cameron and Bob Quinn at the University of Michigan. I believe their first publication was around the 1980s or so, when culture really kind of hit. In 1982, Deal and Kennedy wrote a book called Corporate Cultures, and in 1982, Peters and Waterman also wrote In Search of Excellence, that suggested that organizations had cultures, and that a strong organizational culture was the key to success. So the idea of culture has been around for quite a while, and I think it's I see it making a comeback as well, so you probably have heard quite a bit about this. They have developed a version of the diagnostic that you just took in their book on the Competing Values Framework. they have described that more than 100,000 managers and 10,000 companies have participated in a competing values framework assessment. And their idea is that there are essentially 4 kinds of organizational cultures, and that there's different kind of competing demands, that an organization needs some flexibility and discretion, but it also needs stability and order, and an organization needs to be kind of internally focused and unified, but also externally focused and diversified, differentiated between different groups too, so that if we look at this as a kind of 2x2 matrix, we come out with something like this. The competing values framework suggests that there are essentially 4 different types of organizational cultures. The yellow culture, which is a clan culture focused on people and human development. A green culture called adhocracy, focused on innovation, flexibility, and agility. A blue culture focused on competition, a market orientation, hard driving, and aggressive competition. And a red culture focused on control, stability, efficiency, and consistency. The idea about these 4 different types of organizations is not that if you look at the colors that you wrote down of your current organization and how it might be or ought to be in the future, it's not just that you probably chose one of those colors. You probably saw a couple of things in there that resonated with you. And that's really true about the competing values framework. Every organization has and displays all 4 quadrants. It's just a matter of degree that you see that. So you might see an extreme green with a little bit of red, yellow, and blue in it. There's no one right organizational culture. Culture shift over time. So many organizations start out in the green and then they realize that they're too flexible and they backtrack and add some consistency and control in the red. Organizations have subcultures, so you might find that a certain department reflects one of these quadrants more than another. The opposite quadrants represent competing dynamics. So the idea is that there's some oppositional thinking here. If you look at the green quadrant of being very, very flexible and highly changing and responsive, you might see that the opposite is the red quadrant that's supposed to be very consistent, very uniform, and these competing dynamics often explain some challenges in many organizations. Each of these also specifies a way of approaching change, organizational change. So you see that the ends, long-term change, transformational change, you see those words in the corners of each one of those quadrants that also suggests how an assumption of how change ought to happen. Let's go through each one of the 4 quadrants of the competing values framework. The yellow culture, the yellow box in the upper left, describes a clan culture, a very friendly place where people like to share a lot of themselves, kind of like an extended family. In these organizations, leaders tend to be mentors, coaches. There's a high amount of commitment to the organization, loyalty, tradition, emphasis on the long-term benefit, personal development. The theory here is that teamwork and participation, the development of people, and the caring about people and their development will be the key to the organization's success. A green culture, the adhocracy, all about creativity. This is a dynamic, entrepreneurial, creative place to work. Flexibility and agility are the priorities. People stick their necks out. They take risks because we have to be risk takers in order to be successful. Leaders push people to take risks and to step out and try something new. The idea is that the organization will be successful if we experiment, we're on the leading edge, and we constantly change in order to be the best in the market, come up with the best new product, meet our customers' demands, etc. So adhocracy cultures are all about innovation and change. Blue cultures, market cultures, are all about competition. A results-oriented organization concerned with getting the job done. Leaders are hard drivers. They might chew up and spit people out, producing, asking people to work 10, 12, 15-hour days. You're always on. This is the type of organization where salespeople are described as sharks, sharpen their teeth for breakfast kind of a thing. Very goal-oriented, tough, demanding, an emphasis on winning, beating our competitors, putting them out of business, being focused on our customers, but through aggressive competition. Red cultures, hierarchy, very formal, structured places to work. Procedures govern what people are to do. Leaders are there to control and organize and be efficient. There are many rules and policies that hold the organization together, and the long-term concern is on stability and efficient and smooth operations. The success of the organization here is defined as doing it the same way every time in a very efficient way. So probably cost control, being very conscientious about doing it the same way every time. So the competing values framework, just as one kind of framework for organizational culture, really helps us to see a transition between where your organization is now and where it's going in the future. And I wanted to provide this as one way of enhancing what we read about for cultural strategies of organizing, because as you'll notice, you likely see in your organization that different people get taught different ways of interacting in the depending on what quadrant you emphasized, and so that relates to things like socialization and expectations about decision making. So the competing values framework can often be a useful lens to explain how your organization is developed, organized, and structured.